Hey, you might remember me from a video you saw recently where you exposed a bunch of criminals being put into Ballybritt, into basically an open prison in Ballybritt, and being given just enough money to buy tobacco. So they have cigarettes for smoking while they're figuring out who to rob, murder, rape, or steal from, like they've been doing all over the world. Running from country to country with no identification and no papers, doing as much damage as they can before the law catches up with them. And it was our government that put out advertisements around the world for criminals with no paperwork and no safe haven to come to Ireland and be given new identities, residences, and full social benefits. So, unfortunately, that strategy will attract only the worst criminals to Ireland. And the facility in Ballybritt is capable of integrating 1,000 men like that into our city every year. 1,000 men every year. If they all get new houses every 4 months, that's 1,000 men. 300 men per quarter, per 4 months, and that's 900 men a year. That's 1,000 men a year. So within 10 years, we'll have 10,000 very serious criminals from all around the world living in Ireland under assumed identities provided to them by their Irish government. So how do things like that happen? And you'll often have heard the phrase, it's government by consent. And what that means, if I can explain that to you, is that the other phrase, the power is with the people, or the people have the power. This phrase, which underpins most Western republics, is regarded as true. And this is why when you don't stand up and act together to stop your government, they assume consent. Because you have the power to stop your government. All you have to do is stand up together and protest, and your government will stop. We know this. We've proven it many occasions. But that said, the government, it knows that there will always be a certain amount of opposition to any of its policies. And when very few people show up and voice that opposition, they're entitled to assume that the rest of society consents because they haven't used their power as a member of our community. The power is with the people, and the government assumes that the people is aware that the power is with them, and their power to stop them is to come together and demonstrate opposition. And when they don't do that, the government is entitled to assume that the vast majority of people consent to their policy. So when you don't show up, you are telling the government that you consent to be ruled by whatever act of law they're imposing. It's that simple. And that's how you consent, by not opposing. So outside Ballybritt this morning, we went there quite early. We had decided we needed to gauge the feeling of the people, and I'm very, very happy to report that I haven't seen enthusiasm like this from members of the public driving their car ever. And I'm one of the people that you saw standing on the side of the road with those yellow signs telling you the information that you weren't getting from the media over the last couple of years. I was involved with a group called Hold the Line in Galway, and they have many groups around Ireland, and they're not racist or fascist. They're just like the people of East Wall and Turnipin. They're middle-aged, elderly people, very concerned, genuine fears, and no one has ever accused us of anything hateful in that endeavour. So I would know quite a bit about gauging the enthusiasm of people in motor vehicles, because I've stood at the side of the road many, many times doing just that. And today I can sincerely tell you that I was so pleasantly enthused by what I saw. I'm saying that even at Hold the Line levels, it was 25 to 30% more enthusiastic than the best day we had at Hold the Line. It was so much so that I can tell you that 90% of the cars that passed us gave some indication of support. Everything from a beep to a thumb like this up on the steering wheel, or a finger like this up on the steering wheel, or a full flat palm, or a nod, or a look, or a wink, or a shout out the window. There was a whole range of supportive indications from up to 90% of the drivers that passed. And I myself, I'm very experienced at gauging people's enthusiasms while they're in a vehicle, I was able to say that even of the 10% that didn't show overt support, even of those, half of them were struggling with not raising their finger. Their finger was trembling on the top of the steering wheel, or their thumb was doing something on the top of their steering wheel, or the hand was gone curly as though it was about to do that on the top of the steering wheel. You know, where your hand is like that, but you go to wave and you raise it up and then you wave. You gotta, yeah. So I saw all of these indicators, even on those that weren't overtly showing support. And we can say that the Red Sea poll demonstrated that 75% of the population of this island believe that there is reckless immigration going on. And that must include up to 30 to 40% of the foreign population. That 75%, 10% of it is roughly 30 to 40% of the entire foreign population living on this island. So almost half of the foreign people living on this island agree with the 100% of Irish people, which is that 75% in the poll, is actually 100% of Irish people, virtually, very close to 100% of Irish people agree that there is absolutely reckless immigration going on in our country. Now, I have spent quite some time with people who believe the secret to Irish success is unity. And when you've got poll numbers like these, and the enthusiasm level I saw from drivers entering into that industrial estate this morning, it doesn't get much better. What are we waiting for? 77%? 5 out of 5 businesses? We have 4 out of 5 businesses agree with us that there is reckless immigration going on. So we have the entire support. And I'm forced to wonder. I wonder about these things. That's what I do for a living, I guess, is wondering. And you know, I'm forced to wonder, what is the block? Why would almost 90% of the population of the island think and not act against oppression? Recognize the oppression, identify it, and not act against it. And it could only be fear. And I know it's not collective fear, because people aren't sharing the fears that they have. They're not discussing their fears. So it's not a collective fear. It's an individual fear in a person that's stopping them from taking an action. And those individual fears are often, they're afraid of being called names by strangers and possibly people who are destroying their nation. They're afraid to be called the names by those people in the battle. And at the battlefront, when you go there, some people may call you names. That's just how it is in battle. People are afraid to be identified with the far right, who haven't been identified themselves. You know, people are afraid to be identified with a boogeyman created by the government in order to keep them quiet, to keep them internalizing their fears. That very boogeyman, it's put there to keep you in your car struggling to respond. So we're afraid of what strangers might call us names. We're afraid to be associated with boogeymen. We're afraid that our judgment from our families. We're afraid of judgment by our community. And these are individual fears. These are individual costs. Even if these fears were realized, which many of them are not, most of them are never realized and are only self-control. But when we examine these fears, we can see that they're individual fears, and they do have consequences for individuals. I would say relatively minor consequences as opposed to what could transpire. So we are allowing our nation to be zeroed out, to disintegrate, to evaporate, based on our personal fears about name-calling and judgment. We're going to lose our collective nation. And these fears are not equivalent to losing your nation. They're not on the same basis. They're not measured in the same units. The consequences of losing your nation are so enormous and so vast that you can't allow your personal fear of judgment or whatever, of what might happen to you, stop our nation saving itself, empowering its nationals and saving itself. So I'd ask you, if you cannot get to Ballybritt, I'd ask you to consider not allowing others to cast aspersions on those of us who do go there. And by doing that, you're creating space where you might someday be able to step into it and help in this endeavour to save all nations from the clutches of the globalist elites. And what you must, the trick that they've pulled on us is that they keep the consequences of each of their changes as to a minimum, that the minimum standard that doesn't breach the threshold where people individually will rise up out of their chairs and go and protest and demonstrate collectively. So they realize that if they make their changes slow enough, that at no one time will the motivation to demonstrate the power of the nation working together on an issue, they don't get that close to the threshold where that would occur, and they will pull it back, and they will pull it to stay away from that threshold. But the consequence of us allowing them to operate in that way over a decade or 20 years means that our personal fears at a time will deprive our nation and our children of their homeland. So we're in this situation now where the government are not going to push us hard enough that it will breach our threshold for action. And they're just going to sustain that level for a long period of time. And the danger is that, like the frog that's been put in a pot with the temperature being raised ever so slowly, we'll be in such deep water and such hot water that we're doomed. But I can tell you that for today, I dared to hope. Today, looking in the eyes of those people, those drivers of those cars, I dared to hope. And I caught myself. And I checked myself. Because that's not something I do lightly, is hope. And I can't explain that to you. But I can show it to you. I can show it to you in Ballybritt Industrial Estate this evening at 7 p.m. I can show it to you. And you can dare to hope. Okay, thank you.